I'm not sure if this constitutes a response or not, but it's a series of thoughts prompted by a video that was made recently by someone. I'm really sorry, Count something, I can't get the name in my mind right now, but I'll put it in the sidebar, to do with a question about where logic comes from. What are the origins of logic? And if we're making kind of transcendent claims for the origins of logic, can we do that and then disallow transcendent claims for deities? Isn't there an inconsistency there? So that it comes out of that, really. But what it's got me thinking about, and I'm not sure, as I say, this is actually anything to do with the original video, what it's got me thinking about really is to do with the different kinds of logic and the relationship between logic and embodiment and cognition and thought. Because certainly the kind of logic that was described in that last video that I've mentioned, to do with the law of identity, to do with law of the excluded middle and so on, that's Aristotelian logic, as I understand it, and this isn't really my field, but as I understand it, that's Aristotelian logic, and which is only one of a series of possible logics. But Aristotelian logic, which is really influential, takes as its starting point embodiment. Aristotle is usually configured as a kind of realist, as opposed to Plato, who is an idealist. And the realism of Aristotle is the realism of what it is to be alive and awake as middle-sized objects moving at middle speed in what appears to be a three-dimensional landscape, with all of the embodied properties of that. So it's the logic of that, really. And this is covered a little bit actually in George Lakoff and Mark Johnson's book Philosophy in the Flesh, but they're really talking about philosophies, and they're talking about how different philosophical traditions can be located as attached to a series of ultimately embodied metaphors. And I think they talk about Aristotle in there. They talk about how Aristotelian logic is the logic of middle-sized objects. They don't use this for these kind of terms, these are my terms. But it's the logic of the body and the logic of the human body. So, for example, the law of the excluded middle, which says that a thing either is or isn't, broadly speaking, an idea can either be true or not true, but can't be both. That takes its structure, takes its sense, makes sense out of embodied experience at the scale that we are at, middle-sized objects moving at middle speed. So when I look out on this landscape that I'm in here in Cheshire, I can see the tree, and the tree is. If I shift my eyes slightly to the left, there's a gap, and in that space there is no tree. And at nowhere I look around me can I see trees that are both there and not there. It's the nature of the way that physics operates at our scale, largely Newtonian physics, and the way that our embodiment interprets those physics, which is a slight variation of Newtonian physics, sometimes called naive or folk physics. Places the world around us as a series of objects and spaces where there are no objects, broadly speaking. And the true existence of an object, Phoebe, go this way. The true existence of an object sets the terms by which truth of statements kind of presents itself. So just as there is either a tree or no tree, so a statement can be true or not true, and it can't be simultaneously true and false. And the same is also true of the other Aristotelian features of Aristotelian logic. Okay, anything more beyond that? Well, I suppose I should just say that about these other logics. There are other logics. They're very difficult to grasp, most of them, because we're not evolutionarily prepared to grasp them in the same way that we're not evolutionarily prepared to understand certain branches of physics which are outside Newtonian scale. So just as if, actually there's a good parallel I think I can draw here. As I say, you look at a tree and it's either there or it's not there. and that matches onto Aristotelian logic. That's not the same at different scales. So if you get down to the quantum level, and I'm not trying to be all woo-woo about this, but if you get down to the quantum level, that doesn't actually hold any longer. It is perfectly possible for a subatomic particle to be both there and not there to varying degrees, or to be everywhere until you look at it or something, and it becomes manifest at the location of your instrumentation. So those kind of things non-Aristotelian logic does actually apply at subatomic scales. But the reason why I mention that is that's non-intuitive. We didn't evolve the brains we have to understand quarks and leptons and Higgs bosons, and similarly we didn't evolve a set of ways of knowing which are non-Aristotelian. We have to work quite hard to grasp non-Aristotelian logic, in the same way that we have to work really hard to grasp, or even start to grasp, something like quantum physics. But as I say, there are other logics, and something like fuzzy logic, and there's a really accessible book by Bart Kosko on fuzzy logic, which does acknowledge that that Aristotelian divide is represented in the law of excluded middle, where something is either A or not A, as he puts it. Fuzzy logic does acknowledge that there are other ways of doing it, and fuzzy logic is very robust as a logic and has practical application. My understanding is that my washing machine has a fuzzy logic chip in it, which works. My washing machine apparently isn't either on or off in that Aristotelian A or not A sense. It has a whole series of settings and behaviours which are partially on, partially off, doing all these kind of weird eco-systems that it has, eco-programs, which Aristotelian A or not A doesn't really capture, and that's sometimes referred to as the operations of a fuzzy chip. Which is, a piece of software and hardware that runs fuzzy logic. The other example I've got, which isn't really a good example, but it's an entertaining example, I'm not sure how robust an example it is Robert Anton Wilson, who's one of my favourite science fiction writers, who's dead now, unfortunately. But he writes quite a lot in his books and in his presentations about what he calls maybe logic. And I think he's quoting from a physicist, actually. It might be Jack Sarfati, I can't remember. He's quoting that the universe, as well as yes and no, the universe contains a maybe, is what he says. And he's got a DVD out, Robert Anton Wilson, called Maybe Logic. And there's some stuff all over Google Video and YouTube, and I'll see if I can find some stuff, where he talks about this, what he calls maybe logic, non-Aristotelian logic, applied to personal experience, or perhaps just an outing of our personal experience, which is non-Aristotelian. Because although Aristotle and that set of logics captured by those laws is highly efficient and highly recognizable and intuitively correct, a lot of the way we live our lives isn't according to whether things are true or false in that really simple binary way. We're constantly living in the excluded middle. Our dreams are full of excluded middles. Our intuitions are full of excluded middles. Our thoughts and our feelings are often very ambiguous and non-Aristotelian. And Robert Anton Wilson would probably say that that's the operation of maybe logic. Bart Kosko might say that's a phenomenological interpretation of fuzzy logic. But either way, it's not Aristotelian. Where does it come from? In those terms, it comes from the body. And it comes from the higher functions of an evolved brain being able to think outside the box of the body and think about other kinds of logic and other kinds of spaces. I'm not sure that really constitutes any kind of answer or response, but that's my take on that question about where does logic come from. It depends which logic you mean. If you're talking about Aristotelian logic, it comes from the nature of our embodiment. If you're talking about non-Aristotelian logic, it comes from what is probably the unique ability of humans to imagine other-sized bodies, other-sized environments, environments which don't have the idea of size at all, environments which are acausal, all those kind of things really.